Lance Armstrong and Greg Lemond are the only Americans to ever lift the Tour de France Cup in victory. Greg in 1986, 1989, and 1990, Lance years later and for years longer, from 1999 through 2005. And while these cycling heroes could have gotten along and enjoyed a passing the torch type relationship, they did not. Because, like all things Lance Armstrong, performance-enhancing drugs dominated the narrative. For you see, when one guy is clean and one guy is pretending to be clean, things can get a little complicated and litigious. Families may or may not get threatened, phone calls definitely do get recorded, and before you know it, you've got a big slab of steroid-infused, genetically modified beef. Let's start with our drug-free hero, Greg Lemond. He was the first American, and because Armstrong was later stripped of his wins, the only American to ever win the Tour de France. It was not an easy trail to blaze. And not just because the Tour de France is the hardest endurance battle in all of sport, a grueling 3-week-long 2,500-mile bike race over mountains that seem better suited to be skied down than biked up. Lemond went pro when he was 19, which required moving to France without really knowing French. And in the '86 Tour, it also required trusting teammates who didn't necessarily want to see the young American take the title. And if his teammates didn't want him to win, you better believe his opponents would do anything to keep the trophy from his hands. I'm talking they'd potentially poison him like some sort of Disney witch.
The organizer of the Tour de France came up to me and said, "Greg, you have to be very careful. It's very dangerous right now. Watch your water bottles and watch your bike."
Despite the odds and potential threats to his life, in '86, at age 25, Greg Lemond became the first American to win the Tour de France. Greg's future looks so bright, nothing could stop him now. Nothing except shotgun pellets to his intestines, liver, lung, diaphragm, kidney, heart lining, hands, arms, and legs. Greg was involved in a hunting accident in the spring of '87, just months before he was expected to make another run at the Tour. He very easily could have died, and it was nothing short of a miracle that he didn't. Greg said the experience was more painful than cycling, which actually doesn't make cycling sound that much fun. During his recovery, he lost 30 pounds of muscle and was left with approximately 40 pellets still in his body. It was less damaging to leave them in than try to fish them out. But again, able to do the impossible, Greg got his strength back. And not just enough to walk and live and laugh and love again, but enough to win the Tour de France again. In 1989, just 2 years after having tiny metal pellets puncture basically all his organs, he won again. It was one of the greatest comebacks in the history of sport. And just for good measure, he won in 1990 as well. His admirers were many, including a teenage Lance Armstrong, a member of the U.S. junior cycling team at the time, who said he wanted to be the next Greg Lemond. But in the '92 Tour, Greg struggled to keep up. He thought there must be something wrong with him, but it turned out something was wrong with cycling. Doping was always pretty prevalent in cycling with stuff like testosterone, cortisone, and blood transfusions, but a new drug on the scene, EPO, was much more effective. EPO helps create more red blood cells so riders can work harder and recover faster. It was so effective, riders even used different gears, not needing their small chainring as often. A doctor told Greg that if he wasn't doping, he wasn't winning the Tour de France again. Meanwhile, Lance Armstrong's career was just getting going, weird. In 1993, Lance won the UCI World Championships by a decisive margin, and it looked like the future of cycling had arrived. A year later, both Greg and Lance competed in the Tour de France, and Lance looked good. For Greg, the race was a brutal struggle that ended with him dropping out. Greg retired shortly afterwards. He said it was due to a muscle disease, but many now believe it could have been extreme fatigue from trying to keep up with a peloton on EPO. Lance, however, put up an impressive showing, weird. He was just 22, it was his second year as a pro, and he managed to maintain top 10 status for 10 stages. But there were dark days ahead for Lance. In 1996, when he was just 25, he was diagnosed with stage 3 testicular cancer that had spread to his abdomen, lungs, and brain. And all of a sudden, there was another young cycling standout fighting for his life. Lance underwent an orchiectomy, brain surgery, and 12 weeks of chemotherapy. He said the process was worse than the mountain stages at the Tour de France, which, again, does not make cycling sound like much fun. With just a 50% chance of survival, Lance pulled through. It was an incredible triumph. Greg, being one of the few people who had been in a very similar situation, sent Armstrong a letter saying he's available if Lance wanted to talk. As Lance put in the work to get back to cycling, he also launched the Lance Armstrong Foundation. His body was cancer-free, but he would keep fighting for others. At this point, Greg and Lance's relationship seemed just fine, but the sport of cycling was having some trouble. In 1998, the Tour de France was almost canceled. No, not because they realized the race was too hard and people kept comparing it to almost dying, but rather because of doping. 7 teams either got kicked out or dropped out before they could be caught with EPO. It was a bad look for cycling. But hey, it didn't involve our guys at all. And in 1999, Lance Armstrong won the Tour de France in a comeback story titled, "Hey Cancer, go f*** yourself." Not only did cancer fail to take out Lance Armstrong, it failed to stop him from riding a bike 2,500 miles faster than anyone else. The tour itself was very happy to have the wholesome, uplifting, inspirational Lance Armstrong story center stage and block out memories of the '98 drug scandal. Yeah, sure, there was some controversy. Lance tested positive for a banned substance, but he later revealed that was just because of a skin cream. And yeah, he didn't declare it before like he was supposed to. But why are we questioning the greatest inspirational story ever? Why are we questioning the guy who gives everyone who's been touched by cancer, including small children, a sense of hope? We're not. We might later, but for now, we're not. Lance saw fame Greg Lemond never saw. He racked up huge endorsement deals, he was on the Wheaties box, and New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani declared July 29th Lance Armstrong Day. Lance won the tour again in 2000 and saw more fame and fortune roll in. It was a far cry from the amount of fame Greg Lemond got, where it seemed like a coup just to get on TV. It's hard to imagine Greg Lemond wasn't jealous. His comeback from the brink of death was totally eclipsed. And I guess that's not even the right word, because you can't eclipse something people have never even heard of. If Greg Lemond was jealous, he didn't show it publicly. But don't worry, the beef was about to hit the fan. Greg's suspicions about Lance doping had been building for a while. Greg claims that mechanic Julian de Vries told him Lance doped. But Greg didn't want to make a huge accusation against everyone's favorite cyclist based off one guy's story, and it's a good thing he didn't, because de Vries later denied the whole thing. Greg attended a conference where one of Lance's doctors gave a talk about Lance's post-cancer athletic dominance. During the talk, the doctor accidentally revealed Lance's VO2 max. Your VO2 max is how much oxygen you can suck in, send to your bloodstream, and then send to your muscles while you exercise. It's pretty important to have a high VO2 max if you're an endurance athlete. Greg's was 93. The doctor revealed Lance's was just 78. To Greg, that meant it was impossible for Lance to ever win the Tour de France. Then, in the summer of 2001, Greg, and everyone else, got some more evidence. British journalist David Walsh broke the story that Lance was working with Italian doctor Michele Ferrari. It was well known that Ferrari thought EPO was A-OK. He compared the dangers of too much EPO to the dangers of too much orange juice, which makes him seem like a bad doctor. If you have too much EPO, you die. But if you have too much orange juice, what, you get diarrhea? And I guess depending on how public that diarrhea is, maybe it's worse than death, but come on. So why is Lance Armstrong working with this guy? To Greg, this was the last shred of evidence he needed. Lance was on EPO. Greg wrote a note to Walsh praising his article, saying, "Great work, you're on the right track." Being a responsible journalist, Walsh asked Greg for a quote. Greg said, "If Lance is clean, then it is the greatest comeback in the history of sports. If he isn't, it would be the greatest fraud." It's not the most aggressive quote, it's not an outright accusation, but guess who didn't like it? Armstrong wasn't about to let Greg get away with that. In fact, he allegedly said he was going to fuck over Greg Lemond. About 2 weeks after Greg's quote, Lance called him. Each man recounts the phone call very differently. In Greg's version, Lance was pissed about the quote and threatened to tell everyone Greg was actually the one on EPO. Lemond would later allege Armstrong even tried to pay someone $300,000 to say he used EPO. In Lance's version of the phone call, he was respectful, did not vow vengeance or threaten anyone. He claimed he said Greg was one of his heroes. Oh yeah, Lance also said that Greg was drunk and screaming during the phone call. So, different. Days later, Greg got some more phone calls. Tom Weisel, a fancy-pants investor who backed Lance's team, Terry Lee, the CEO of Bell Helmets, John Boxbaum, the CEO of a real estate company who wasn't super involved in cycling except as a wealthy fan, all called and told Greg to quit bad-mouthing Lance. Worse yet, the CEO of Trek, John Burke, got in touch. Trek worked with Greg selling his bicycle brand Lemond Cycles, but they also sponsored Lance. So Trek was stuck in the middle, forced to pick who they wanted to support based on truth, principles, and who would earn them more money. According to Greg, Lance was pressuring these bigwigs to help keep Greg quiet. In fact, Greg even tape-recorded a call with John Burke in which Burke admitted Lance was pressuring him to do something about Greg's comment. With the cycling community organized against him, Greg Lemond did what people with lawyers do and passed the problem on to his lawyer. About a month later, an apology from Greg appeared in USA Today. Though the apology is attributed to Greg, he hadn't even seen it until he picked up the paper. The quote was actually ghostwritten by Lance's agent. Worse yet, the apology didn't even help him that much. Lance kept the pressure on, and Greg Lemond was basically ostracized from the world of cycling. Lance spread rumors saying Greg had drug and alcohol problems. Greg claimed Trek started tanking sales of his Lemond brand bikes. He'd later sue Trek for breach of contract, and they'd countersue him because his Lance accusations were bad for the brand. As a 3-time winner, he got to attend the Tour de France 100th anniversary celebration, but he had little to no fun due to Lance's influence. Meanwhile, Lance was experiencing little to no fallout from Greg's quote implying he doped. He won the Tour de France in 2001. Then he did a Nike commercial that was basically taunting Lemond.
Everybody wants to know what I'm on. What am I on? I'm on my bike, busting my ass 6 hours a day.
His cancer foundation was funding government programs left and right. He was a goddamn hero. He won the Tour again and again. He wore leather jackets and dated Sheryl Crow. Live Strong bracelets adorned the wrist of everyone from Usher to John Kerry to Michael Scott. Greg remained fairly quiet about Lance through all this, but in 2004 he struck again. In June 2004, Greg was a source for a French book entitled Elle Confidentielle, Les Secrets de Lance Armstrong. Translated, that title means bad news for Lance. But the book didn't end up having much effect in America. It was written in French, for one thing, and for another, Lance was doing stuff like bringing hope to kids with cancer. Lemond didn't back down and gave an interview to a French newspaper trashing Lance. This is a bad look. We know now he has truth on his side, but at the time, it was not well received. Lance's reputation was so good, the press was fighting his Greg Lemond battle for him. Which was convenient, because Lance was busy winning his 6th Tour de France. After the 2004 tour, there was finally some fallout for Lance. A sponsor went to court with him, claiming they shouldn't have to pay him if he doped. They set out to prove a story from the LA Confidential book, which claimed, in 1996, while in a hospital room full of guests, Lance told a cancer doctor he used EPO. Greg was called to testify. No, Greg wasn't one of the guests in the hospital room, but he talked to someone who was. And he tape-recorded the conversation. Stephanie McIlvin, Lance's rep from his sponsor, Oakley, testified that she was in the room, but didn't remember if Lance told doctors if he used EPO or not. But Greg had a tape of Stephanie saying things like, "I'm not going to lie, I was in the room, I heard it." Which, okay, isn't gonna send her to jail for perjury, but it looked pretty bad for Lance. Oh right, you can't get Lance Armstrong down. He was largely unaffected other than winning $7.5 million in the case. He went on to win his 7th Tour de France and earn more money and fame and love and respect. He retired shortly after the 2005 tour, but beef doesn't retire. In 2006, Greg took to the press to say that Lance's response to his accusations was worse than previously thought. To his credit, Lance countered with his words, not physical violence toward anyone's family. And again, Lance didn't take much of a hit. In 2008, he had a new celebrity girlfriend, and perhaps more notably, he decided to come out of retirement. Greg didn't love that. Lemond attended a press conference that was part of Lance's comeback and tried to talk about how VO2 max should be part of drug testing. In response, Lance cut him off and played the cancer card.
We're here to talk about defense. Global cancer campaign. Come back to cycling. It's time for us, everybody in this room, to move on.
The scene was a metaphor for their beef. Lance center stage with a microphone, controlling the conversation. Greg, a largely unknown face in the crowd, alone, struggling to be heard. But once again, unforeseen dark days were on the horizon for Lance Armstrong, this time in the form of an old teammate. After being caught doping himself, Floyd Landis came clean about the systematic doping program on the Postal Service team, implicating Lance Armstrong. The U.S. Anti-Doping Agency launched an investigation. Armstrong sued to stop it, but seems like his charm was wearing off. So he tried a new strategy. Instead of fighting the drug charges, he said the US ADA is rigged against him. He didn't dope, but these crooked investigations might prove otherwise. But Lance's magic spell / period of successfully covering his secrets with lies and intimidation had run its course. The US ADA stripped Lance of his 7 Tour de France titles and banned him for life. Disgraced, Lance stepped down from his foundation. He lost sponsors partly because some testimony from Kathy Lemond, Greg's wife, came to light. She had said under oath that Nike helped pay to cover up Lance's 1999 positive drug test. Nike denied it and also dropped Lance. His other sponsors followed suit. At this point, Lance still hadn't admitted to doping, and with his back against the wall, he found a way to step into the spotlight. During his televised confession, Armstrong said he owed Greg, among others, an apology. Wow, what a good guy. But that didn't do much to mend the relationship. Months later, Greg had a TV interview of his own to let everyone know he's still pissed.
You think you should go to jail?
I do, yeah.
In 2013, the U.S. Department of Justice sued Armstrong for $100 million on behalf of the Postal Service. Armstrong tried to keep Greg from testifying, but apparently he hates me because I was mean to him doesn't hold up in court. The government ended up settling for $5 million, which is significantly less than $100 million, but is still an amount of money I wouldn't want to lose. Today, Greg Lemond stands alone as the only American Tour de France winner. He's accepted in the cycling community again, he's a broadcaster for Eurosport, and he's celebrated as a hero in the fight against doping. Lance Armstrong has a podcast. Okay, during the time Lance was fooling everyone except Greg, the Livestrong Foundation raised an incredible amount of money. But if you go to the Livestrong Foundation website today, you don't see much evidence of Lance Armstrong, even if you click on the Our History tab. So is Greg Lemond the winner of this beef? He was eventually proved right, justice prevailed. But does that make up for the long period when he was hated by the very sport that he dedicated his life to? A period he calls 12 years of hell? Sometimes you can be right and still lose. Maybe Lance Armstrong is the winner of the beef? Pushing around Greg allowed him to put off getting caught, and in that time he lived the high life, which of course means he had farther to fall. Seems like there's no winner in this beef, but maybe it's just because this beef isn't really resolved. Greg hasn't forgiven Lance, and he speaks up when others lean towards forgiveness. And Lance's defenders, like Johan Brunel from the Postal Service team, still exist. For this is a beef that will always be simmering on a low fire, just waiting for someone to turn up the heat. Oh my God, thank you so much for watching. Why don't you go ahead and subscribe real quick? That would be great. And then after that, feel free to check out some more beef history, or maybe this video the YouTube robots think you'll enjoy.